Hi, my name is Kim and I'm a librarian. So you can probably imagine that I love books. I love reading books, I love talking about books, I love writing about books, I love organizing books, and I love making books. And that's why today I am very excited to show you how to make one of these stick-bound booklets. This is a really fun project and I especially like it because at the end of it you get this very cool, very usable product. So how do you make these stick-bound booklets? I'm going to talk first about some of the very basic materials that you would need to get started, and as we go along I'm going to give you some other optional materials that you could use. So the first thing you would need is some kind of cardstock or light cardboard to become the covers of your book. So you need two pieces, one for the front, one for the back. I've already cut these down to size for today. The other thing you're going to need is just some kind of paper to be the inside of your book. I've here just got regular printing paper, so it's just blank on both sides. You can use any kind of paper though. You can use lined paper or graph paper, really just anything you can get your hands on to become the pages of your book. Other materials you would need, some kind of scissors to cut your project down to size, a hole punch or some other way to make holes in your product, either rubber bands or some thread, some thick thread or yarn to kind of tie your booklet together, and I'll show you how to use both of those products. And then last, for the stick-bound journal, you of course need some kind of stick. And there's a lot of different options for the kind of stick you could choose, right? This is the dowel rod. You can get these at a craft store, you can get these at a hardware store. You can also instead use a bamboo skewer like you buy at the grocery store. You could use a craft stick or a popsicle stick, or you could just use a stick from your yard. Those are all really great options. Anything you can get your hands on that's kind of hard and stick-like you could use to help you bind this book. So those are the basic tools you would need, and I'll talk about some other things as we go along. So let's get started. We're going to make our booklet. We have our pieces of cardstock for the cover. I've already cut these down to size like I mentioned before. These are, you can see, white. And you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, Kim, those are so boring. They just blend right into your wall. And that's right. These are pretty plain Jane cardstock pieces here. But you can dress them up if you like. So here's an example of one that I had, just plain white cardstock, and I painted this little flower on it to make my cover. That's a really cool option. You can do that with any kind of resources you have, like pencils or crayons or markers or paint like I've done here. Another option you have to decorate your book cover is to wrap it in some decorative paper, like I've done with these other samples. And I've wrapped this one both front and back, and I've wrapped this one just the front. So you have that kind of option depending on whether or not you have some decorative paper. So I have a couple pieces of decorative paper here. I'm just going to show you some options. This one, you can see, is thick like cardstock already. If I had a thick piece of decorative paper, I could just cut this down and make this the cover of my book and not worry about wrapping that cardstock at all because it's already there. This piece is thin like a regular piece of paper, and I'm going to show you how to wrap that cardstock with this paper today just so you have a demonstration of it so we can get started. So how do you do this? I've got my piece of decorative paper, I've got my cardstock. I can see that the decorative paper is bigger than my cardstock just by a tad. I don't want it to be too much bigger, so we're going to cut it down in a moment. But first, I'm going to take this piece and glue it onto the white side, the back side of that paper. So I've got my glue stick. This is another optional material you might need or want for this project. And I'm going to put the glue all over my cardstock. And then I'm going to flip it upside down so that the glue side presses onto the back side of that decorative paper. And I'm pressing it in as tightly as I can here. And I can show you this up close. You can kind of see that I've got all the way around the edge about a 1/4 border of white paper around that cardstock. And on this side I've got about maybe 1.5 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and cut 1 inch of that paper off. So I'm going to cut that off with my scissors. Alright, I've cut that off. I'm going to save this for another craft project later. Alright, so I've cut that down to size. I've got a nice trim border here. The next thing to do, of course, is to start folding this in. But check this out. If I start folding it as it is, when I get to these corners, I'm going to have this like extra thickness there, right? I don't want extra thickness. That's going to make it just a little bit harder to close properly or to lay really flat on the page. So what I'm going to do is trim each of these corners just kind of like in a diagonal, kind of slightly curved shape, just like that. So I'm going to go all the way around every single corner, this diagonal trim, with a slight curvature to it. There we go. So I've done that all the way around the end. Now it's time for me to start folding this over. And again, I'm going to take my glue stick, I'm going to rub it onto the paper edge there, and I'm going to fold it over. And I'm pressing it right now with my fingers. But I'm going to show you another tool. If you take up bookbinding as a craft or a hobby, you might want a tool like this. This is called a bone folder. And what this does is helps you get these like much more crisper kind of folds. This is a really fun tool. Again, one that people who take up bookbinding as a hobby might have in their supply kit. So here I am using that bone folder to help me press down my folds. Okay, so maybe you don't have a bone folder at home, and that's okay, because most of us, right, aren't going to have a bone folder at home. You can use instead something like your craft stick or other kind of sharp-edged object that'll really act the same way. I'm going to go ahead and use that craft stick to help me push down these edges. All right, moving it all the way around. I'm trying to be as perfect as I can on this. And I've got another layer of glue, folding that edge over, and again, flattening that against the edge. Okay, so now I've got this cover wrapped all the way around. I've got it secured on all edges. It's looking really good. If I wanted to, before I started this wrapping process, I could have covered this inside with another piece of paper, or I could decorate that. I chose not to do that today, but that's always an option. And here we have a wrapped cover with decorative paper. Now, this looks pretty cool, I have to say, but we don't all have decorative paper at home. Another option you could do is to take a piece from a magazine, an old magazine, cut it out, and make a cover that way. And that's what I've done with this one here. This is just a page from that magazine. This one is showing you basil and mint and, what is that, cilantro. And I'm pointing that out because the next step we have to do is make holes in our booklet. And we have to think about whether or not we want our holes on top this way or on top this way. That's something you really want to pay attention to if you're using something like a decorative paper or you've decorated your cover in some way, because you want the directionality of that image to make sense, right? For this one, for example, I had to put the holes up here because that would make these words readable, right? If I put the holes this way, the words would be running vertically. They wouldn't make a lot of sense to us as readers. So just think about that before you start in on your holes. How do you make the holes? Okay, so I'm going to show you what I do, and I will talk about some other methods. So I have this little ruler, and what I like to do is measure out from one side. I'm just going to put my holes up here at the top. I'm going to measure out from the side here an inch. And then I'm going to take my hole punch, and I'm going to push it all the way through so that it meets an inch. And I'm going to make that hole. I'm going to slide my ruler out and make that hole. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm just going to hold it where there's an inch, and I'm going to push my hole punch in all the way. I'm going to make that hole. Now, I'm not being super precise here, right? I only just kind of casually laid that ruler against it and pushed the hole punch in as far as it went. For me, that's okay. If you were going to give this, though, to somebody as a gift, or you wanted to make something super special, I would just take that extra moment to measure out like maybe 1 inch this way and 1 inch that way, and make sure you have a right angle and all those kind of things to make that more precise. For me, for this project, what I did I think is totally great and not really perceptible by most people. So I've got this, it's looking good. I'm going to put the back cover against it, and I'm going to match up those holes that I just made again with my hole punch to create holes in the back cover. So here we go, got one hole in. Let's get the other guy lined up. Boom, got the other one in there. All right, now I need to get some pages in my book. And again, you can use any kind of paper that you like. I'm going to use this regular printing paper because it's what I have on hand. And what I'm going to do is fold it into quarters. And the way you do that, right, is first you fold it hot dog style like this. ready, I'm going to use my bone folder and make this a nice fold. And then I'm going to fold it hamburger style like this. Alright, and that's how I would get 4 pieces that would fit this piece of cardstock, which I'd already cut down to 1/4 size earlier. And then I would cut this out, and I would cut as many as I wanted pages in my book. I'm not going to cut them out today. I've already got some of those pre-cut for our booklet just for today's video. If you aren't using something that is exactly 1/4 size a sheet of paper, that's totally okay. What you would want to do maybe is take your cover piece and line it up against your bigger piece of paper and see how big it is, then trim that around and start using that as just a pattern to cut more and more pages to fit your book. You want something that is going to be about the same size as your cover or slightly smaller than your cover, okay? All right, so let's work on these pages. The next thing we're going to want to do is cut some holes in this. I'm going to use about just half of these. The next thing we're going to do is cut some holes in these to match our cover. So I'm taking my decorative cover here and laying it on top, evening it up to the edge of that page. Oops, I'm going to have to take out a few more just to get the hole punched through. And I'm going to do just like I did with the back cover, line it up to where my hole was previously and punch. I'm going to do the same on the other side. Line it up and punch. This is a little bit difficult to grip. If you're having some trouble with your hole punch, do ask maybe your grown-up to help you out with that. I'm going to go ahead and pop this one in too. And I'm going to tell you about another kind of tool. So I'm using a hole punch today that works really well for this project. If you don't have a hole punch, something you can do is kind of like slightly fold over your paper and snip a little edge in there. That would take a little bit longer and it might not look as tidy, but that's a solution that you have. And I want to talk to you about another tool that somebody who does bookbinding by hand might use, and that's this. This is called an awl, A-W-L, awl. And somebody who does bookbinding as a craft or a hobby might have one of these tools. And what they do with it is they lay their book pages down, they hold them all together with some kind of clamp, and they would have some kind of protective surface so they didn't hurt their table. And they would kind of poke through all those pages with their awl. And that's how they would form the holes for their book. We don't need an awl for this project. It's just kind of a cool tool to know about if you're interested in learning more about bookbinding. Okay, so we've got all of our holes cut into our book. We can see they go all the way through, and we're getting ready to bind it. So we're going to take a stick, and I think for this project I'm going to use this stick that I just found from my yard, and that's the stick I'm going to use for my book. And I'm going to show you how to first bind this book with a rubber band. I've got my stick, I've got my book, all my pages are together. I'm going to take that rubber band and loop it around my stick, and I'm going to feed it through one of the holes. And I've got it, oops, it fell right off my stick. Okay, let's try that again. I've got it looped onto my stick. This time I'm going to hold it with one finger while I feed the other end through this other hole. All right, I got it. Perfect, perfect. And I'm going to wrap the rubber band back through the other hole, okay? And here we go. So it's back through the other hole. I've got it back around that stick, and you can see, I pull it tightly in the back. It looks pretty good. Now it is too loose, right? This rubber band's a little bit too big for this project. If that happens to you, you can find a rubber band that does fit, or you can just kind of pull one of those rubber band pieces, one of those loops up, and put a knot in it. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm just going to wrap that around, make a knot, just like that. I can trim these extra pieces off if I wanted to. And then I've got my booklet. And I think that looks pretty good. You can see it's pretty nice. Now you might be looking at this booklet thinking, okay, but that page doesn't really open very easily. That's going to be hard to use. Yeah, that's going to be a matter of preference. If you don't like the way that is, you can take a tool like your bone folder or a ruler and lay it just against your whatever stick you've used for your binding, and use that to help you fold open that cover to give it a nicer kind of lay. Okay, so you've got that option. Now, if you don't have rubber band, if you instead want to use thread, which I think looks a little bit nicer, I will show you how to do that. And I'm going to show you something else you could do. So I want to use for this one my dowel rod. This is a really cool thing to use if you've got it available, but it is way too big for my project. So how can I trim this? Or how could I trim that stick from my yard if I needed to? If you have a tool like garden shears, that's where this will come in really handy for trimming down your rod. So I've got this piece. It is too big for my book. I'm going to try to make it almost the exact same size here. I'm going to hold my shears against it and trim it just like this. Ready? All right. Now, before you use a tool like your garden shears, you do want to talk to your grown-up just to make sure that that's okay, or they could help you out with that, because they are a little bit challenging to use and they take a little bit of force to kind of cut through your sticks. All right, so I've got my piece cut to size. It looks pretty cool against my book. And then I've got my thread. And what I'm going to do is just take out a pretty sizable piece of thread. It's okay to have more than enough here. You can always trim away stuff, but you can't add more very easily. So I'm going to cut off a pretty big piece here. All right. And what I'm going to do is fold it in half. So I've got my two tails here, and find that loop, that end loop here. I'm going to put that loop that I just found against my stick. And I'm going to feed the tails through the holes. I'm going to show you this once I get these in here. It is a little bit more difficult to hold together in these early stages than the rubber band, but I think it does look a little bit nicer in the end. That's a personal preference, but I think it does look a bit nicer. Oops. Okay, drop that again. I'm going to try it the other way and put the loops through the hole. And here we go. All right, I've got my first one in there. I've got the cord wrapped around my stick. I'm going to bring it back the other way. And again, this is, I think I mentioned this is a nylon thread. It's a thicker thread, so it's really nice for this project. You don't have to have nylon thread. You could use instead yarn or just some other kind of thick thread. A piece of embroidery floss that's, the 6 strands together would work really nicely. Some kind of twine. A lot of different options there. All right, so I've got the thread around that first stick. I'm going to take the tail and bring it back through the holes, the opposite holes here. So I've got the tail over here, and I'm bringing the thread through the opposite way. All right, and then I'm going to, and there you can see they're above the stick right now. I'm going to take the tail and put it back through the hole, but this time leaving the stick there, so it's going underneath that stick. So it's going back through. There we go. Okay, so I've got one piece here. I've got 2 strands here because it was both pieces going through together. And then what I like to do is bring it back through the first hole, just to make it a little bit, I think visually more, just as more visually pleasing. For some reason for me, it doesn't look as nice to have 1 and 2, but it doesn't bother me so much to have 3 and 2. So I'm going to bring this back through the first hole and back the other way so it wraps around that stick one more time. So I'm going to pull this, right through the back. You could wrap this around that stick as many times as you like. I'm going to stop at just these 2. Oh, I dropped one. So you could wrap this around the stick as many times as you like. I am going to stop at just 2, but do whatever you think looks the best to you. And again, if you don't like this is just too unwieldy, or you don't have any kind of thread, you could use that rubber band and it looks really nice. So I've got that tied up. And what I'm going to do is take those pieces, the tail that's left over, I'm going to bring it under the threads on the back. And then I'm going to knot it. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to knot it again, just to give it some extra hold there. So I don't want my book to fall apart. So I've got this tied up, and now I've got quite of a long tail. That's okay. I'm just going to trim it right off. All right. And then I've got my completed booklet. Very cool. So this one is the tied version, and then we've got the rubber band version. They're both looking pretty good, and they're both ready to use. So I've been showing you a lot of different types of materials that you could do to do this project. There's a lot of ways you can approach it, and I think it's really fun. I like to do a lot of crafts, and I like to challenge myself when I do crafts. So when I was working on this project, I thought, okay, what if I'm at home and I don't have access to any of these kind of materials? I don't have any regular cardstock, and I don't have any fancy paper, and I don't have anything that could be like the inside of my paper. I have just very basic stuff. What could I do? And I thought, okay, here's what you could do. You find for your cardstock an old food container. So I've got an old food container here. Cut it down to size to be your cover in your back. For the inside of the pages, you could use a paper grocery bag. Cut that down to size to be the inside of your booklet. You could take out the ones that have any kind of printing from the grocery store on or whatever, if you like. For a stick, maybe you have some of these like chopsticks that are left over from having takeout one night. And again, of course, you could use a stick from your yard. But I use this. And for the threading, right? If you don't have thread, or you don't have rubber bands at home, you could make plarn, right? Which is that kind of plastic yarn you can make from old grocery bags. And I made an example just like this to show you. So here we've got it bound with that plarn. Here's the plarn tied on the back. This is a chopstick from that carryout. This cover in the back are from an old food container, and these inserts are from a grocery bag. And this is a really cool book. I like that the pages are thick the way those grocery bags are. It's got a nice tooth to it. I think it'd be fun to do some pencil sketches on. It's just really, really cute. So there's a lot of different ways to do this project, and I think all of them turn out really, really nicely. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you make some really cool books. If you do make some cool books, please show us them. Post pictures in the comments below. If you have another idea for a craft challenge for me, I would love to hear about that as well. So, and I would love to see if you challenge yourself and see what kind of cool books you can come up with that are different and unique. I would really love to see that. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoy making some books, and I can't wait to see what you make. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day.